full name is Barbara Louise Hayes. And for my entire life, I almost in reflexively say that's Hays, no E, because everyone wants to put an E in my name and it's never had an E in it. So there you have that. And I was born. I'm in the first year of the baby boomer generation. My father was in the South Pacific during World War II, and he came back in 1945, and I was born in 1946. I was born in Peoria, Illinois, but it was because there was no hospital in this rural southern Indiana town where my parents were going to set up housekeeping, where my father's family had lived. And so my grandparents lived in Peoria. And so my mother went to stay with them, and I was born in Peoria. I became a resident Hoosier at age 3 weeks.
Okay. And so were you the firstborn in your family?
I was the firstborn in my family.
All right. And so what was your life like growing up, and especially in terms of how it might have influenced your joining the women's movement?
Well, I've always said, when I'm kind of asked that general question, that the greatest gift I really ever got was that I was raised by two people who lived through the Great Depression and World War II. The values and the way we did things have been things that I have taken with me all my life. I've just it's given me fantastic grounding for not just feminism, but a lot of different activities that I've been involved in. I think that the fact because I'm now interested in genealogy, my father's family came to Southern Indiana from England, Germany, and Switzerland and Alsace. But my mother's family, and that was in the like 17 and 1800s. But my mother's family came exclusively from Germany and Eastern Europe. And my grandparents were first generation Americans. And so all of these questions about immigration and how we make why people come to the United States have been really interesting to me, because I always took my multicultural background for granted and never really thought about it very much until recently. But it definitely has shaped a lot of who I am. My education was really important in my family, and that goes back several generations, and it applied equally to the females and the males. I have relatives, great aunts and so forth and so on, that all went to the equivalent of a junior college. My parents were both college graduates and had master's degrees, but my father's parents also went to college. So we didn't have a lot of I think material possessions in terms of new cars and things like that, but education was just really important. We didn't have a television. I thought we were actually a little bit on the wealthy side because we owned an Encyclopedia Britannica, and we were expected to know how to use it. And so that's kind of how I came at some of this from an intellectual perspective. But as I grew older, I became more aware of discrimination against women. I think one sort of example of this that makes me smile even to this day is that I was absolutely fascinated by politics. I was the editor of the high school newspaper. I loved to write. I loved current events. And my high school guidance counselor never got the memo. And even though I had gotten a C- in chemistry, I was encouraged to enroll in a 4-year nursing program at Indiana University because that was more probably appropriate for women than to become a political scientist or a history major. So that was an early lesson that I got in how women are stereotyped. We had we did a lot of things I think in the name of being self-sufficient. That was very important. My mother made all my clothes. We canned vegetables from the garden. My grandfather taught me how to harness a horse. So all of those things kind of gave me this grounding of wanting to be as accomplished as I could, but as comfortable as I could in my own skin.
Very good. Wonderful. So, so tell us about when you got involved with the movement.
Well, actually, I went to college, and I was my freshman year was really awful. My father died. My grades tanked. I really made a lot of different decisions about what I was going to do. I got married. I helped put my husband through graduate school, and he got a job in Michigan. And so we moved to Michigan, and we had 2 daughters. And my experience was multifaceted. For the first time, I was home all day long. I could read. I could study what I wanted to study, and I also could was very interested in reading to my children and getting them started in a good way, a good educational background. There were no books where women were anything except teachers or mothers or nurses or witches. That just sort of covered it. We would have, my daughter was interested in learning about microscopes. The only book we could find was entitled Greg's Microscope. And so I went to the library, and the local Now chapter in Midland, Michigan had put together a non-sexist reading list. And there was some information on the bottom of the page. And so, and I actually found out that we had a mutual friend. So I had my mutual friend introduce us, and this woman was very involved in the Now chapter and got me to come to my first Now meeting in Michigan. The chapter did a lot in the way of social issues but I was just fascinated by what was going on with the ERA and constitutional law. My uncle, my dad's brother, was just a wonderful, more than a role model, but just a support system for me. He used to send me articles about this ERA and how this woman named Phyllis Schlafly was just throwing a huge monkey wrench into all of the ratification efforts that people were trying to get. This was by like 1974. And so the chapter was very interested, even though Michigan ratified almost right away in 1972. we found that, first of all, the anti-ERA people were raising a lot of money in the state, but we couldn't get a lot of women who were supporting the ERA to really speak out on behalf of the amendment, because the antis had all of these horrible scenarios that would happen if the ERA were ratified. Like, women would not be able to collect Social Security in their husband's Social Security account. They wouldn't be able to. They would have to pay different taxes. It was just, but nobody wanted to take on these people because they would just talk you down, shout you out, and it was really horrible. I actually went through that. But anyway, what some people in the chapter, we all got together and we said, look, this is crazy. All of these women are well educated. Our friends were well educated. They were articulate. They just needed the information. They just needed to be able to feel confident enough to stand up and say, no, you're wrong, and have the information that they needed to discuss this ERA in public. And so what we did was we put together a template for a day-long workshop that groups of women in towns all over Michigan could put on. It had topics that needed to be covered. It had sample handouts. It had suggestions for speakers that lived all over the state if there wasn't somebody local that they could get to do the work, to come and do the presentation, I guess I should say. And so it really did help get more people. Well, it helped in a couple of ways. It helped some of the women's groups in these communities get together more to work on progressive issues. But it also helped get women to be more confident about speaking out. And so that was my first sort of ERA thing that we did. And this was probably in 79. I joined the chapter in 75.
Okay.
But we worked on the countdown or the extension campaign, and we tried to do a lot of info evenings. I think that's what we call them, where we talked about various things that concerned the amendment so that people could get really comfortable about debating it and understanding what was going on when they read things that didn't sound right. But for me personally, I could not have been more fascinated by things like if a state rescinded, what did that mean? Because there was case law from the 1920s about when some states had rescinded their ratification of an amendment, and there was a great deal of concern, which of course exists to this day, about whether or not the fact that the time limit was in the promotion clause at the beginning, the introductory clause, the beginning of the amendment, and not actually in the amendment itself, if that meant anything in terms of actually, and this sort of thing just, I read and read and read. I thought this was the most fascinating stuff. And so it really got me started wanting to do more to get the ERA ratified.
Okay, good. So you're still raising your kids and not in the workforce at this point, right?
Well, I had part-time jobs when when it worked out in my otherwise busy schedule.
Right.
I worked in a bank for a while, and I worked in the business library at Dow Corning. My husband had we had moved to Midland. He worked for the Dow Corning Corporation. And so I got a job in the business library, and that was very, that helped a lot. And it was also, I could arrange my hours so I could still, help my kids with after school activities and things like that. Yes.
Did you do some educational, did you go to school while you were in Midland?
Well, I took classes from time to time. What I actually went back to school after I worked on the Countdown campaign in Illinois.
Okay, I got ahead of you. Yeah.
Well, I went to the 1978 NOW conference in Washington, and they were recruiting people literally in the hallways to sign up to work on the Countdown campaign in a state. And so my mother at that time lived in central Illinois. And of course, that's a neighboring state to Michigan. So I was like, okay, well, I'll just volunteer in Illinois. And the arrangement that I worked out with the folks in Illinois was that I would come to the state for between 2 and 3 weeks, mostly 3 weeks every month. And then I would go home for a month. And then I would come back and stay for another 3 weeks. And this often, I think in the process, there was a primary campaign where we were trying to get pro-ERA legislators elected. There were lobby days that were organized on a regular basis for professional groups like nurses lobby day, teachers lobby day, and so forth. And the Springfield office hosted a lot of those, and we got to do that. And it was fun. It was fun. I didn't always stay over in Decatur with my mother, but I did a lot. And it was really nice as an adult to move back in, so to speak, and be able to spend a little bit of time with her. She was very cool about everything, being this sort of, activist support system. I remember one time I showed up with 4 interns that had shown up at the Springfield office from some college in Iowa. And they apparently their paperwork had gotten lost, and we had no idea they were coming. So they didn't even have a place to stay. So they came over to Decatur and slept on my mother's living room floor.
Amazing.
I think that, as an adult child, you always, you find out things about your parents. I think the most shocking thing that I still can't believe, my mother watched Dallas every week. I just found that appalling. Anyway, but it was fun. It was fun in so many ways. And I think, Mary Jean, what that started me focusing on more than anything else was the whole process of grassroots organizing. In other words, most of these women had never done anything this political. They had jobs, or they didn't, but they, if you talk to them about going to talk to the county council about something, they immediately had more things to do and couldn't possibly help out. But getting somebody out of their comfort zone was just fascinating to me. And I couldn't at that point see how it was done, because people's comfort zones are usually very very carefully constructed to protect them. However, what I knew that you had to have wins. And to motivate grassroots people, you have to have a victory. You have to have something. And the ERA had a lot of little victories, but the final result was not a victory. And so we had to look for other things that happened that were good for the women's movement, besides just the fact that we wanted to ratify the ERA. We accomplished a lot of coalition work. We had a lot of women running for office. In other words, we had to look for those kinds of things. But the whole way we went about working with people at the grassroots level became my passion, really. So when I got done with the campaign in Springfield and I went home, I decided to go back to college. And I this time did not major in a four-year nursing program, but I started down a path of getting a bachelor's in political science. And I, at that point, was fascinated to learn a lot of the ways that political parties were using actually perfectly sound, statistically arrived at formulas for getting voter turnout.
Mm-hmm.
And they had been doing this, in other words, understanding that people needed to hear the name of a candidate a certain number of times before they realized that, you know, this person was running for an office, and hear about the issues enough to associate. And all of this was very, very researched, sound, operating procedure for a lot of these campaigns. But what I started understanding was that this was not a whole lot different than what NOW was trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
This was getting people out of their comfort zones. This was helping them make those associations, feel that excitement when they were able to get the member of the county council to change their position on something, or they had a particularly clever action that they were doing about an issue. So I found the education that I was getting about politics to be something that I was really excited to try to adapt
Mm-hmm.
to my work in NOW.
Mm-hmm.
And I became the president of Michigan NOW. And 2 weeks or 3 weeks after that, Walter Mondale selected Geraldine Ferraro to be his running mate. And so I had another job. I had to learn how to speak in public really fast. I also had to learn how to drive around in downtown Detroit, which was quite a shocking experience.
Right.
And arrive at my destination. That was the other part. But it just all started coming together for me, that this idea of having grassroots philosophies and ways of motivating people to get outside of this comfort zone, but to also feel a power that we wanted them to feel as making strides, achieving things in the women's movement.
Mm-hmm.
It just started coming together with me, and I realized that this was what I really wanted to do. So I graduated, and I decided at that point to move to, I actually applied to several graduate schools, and one of the ones that I was accepted at was the University of Maryland in College Park. And so that kind of fit with the idea that I wanted to come to the Washington, D.C. area. I'd always wanted to live in Washington, D.C. or in the metropolitan area.
Mhm.
So at that point, I moved to Washington and um, started taking some graduate classes, but also Ellie Smeal was, calling me up every couple of weeks. Oh yes, can you come in and work on this, or we need some people to make some calls to some chapters about this. And so this was, by now we're at 1986, and so I had a little apartment out in Tacoma Park,
Mhm.
and I started working at the Now office whenever I had time, and I was taking classes at the University of Maryland.
Okay. So now you've
One
been,
of the classes that I took was actually the one that pulled everything together, and it was just I don't, you talk about how fate puts you in a certain place at a certain time when you're hearing a certain message. I took a class under a woman named Margaret Conway. She'd written a book called Political Participation in America.
Hmm.
And it really pulled all of this together. I didn't understand why people didn't keep a copy of this book just like right by their beds and read it all the time. It was just fascinating. She is a political science researcher. She's actually still alive. She's a professor emeritus at a university in Florida, but she's also done a lot of research in political participation and how it is affected by gender and race. And it just started me on this path. I had friends, as some of them got so tired of me that they would think of other reasons not to have coffee with me because all I wanted to do was talk about political participation. I had one friend that we would she would get me to go on walks, and I talked to her until she probably just, her head was about to explode. But I found that I could hone my message better, and I could get more interest in trying to adjust and shift some of Now's outreach a little bit more, so that people were doing more purposeful membership recruitment, membership retention, leadership training. Women were getting skills to work with a more diverse membership than we probably had. And it was really just the passion of wanting women to have equal rights to men wasn't getting us anywhere. I mean, that was fine, but we needed more people than that.
right.
Because as you know, the other problem we started having was that we were victims of our own success. All of a sudden, all these people that used to be around for phone banks and rallies and work had jobs.
Right.
And so we had to change.
Mhm.
And change is always hard.
Always.
I actually have to credit Kim Gandy, because she actually helped me have a platform to make some of these changes. I worked at the Now office. I went on staff full time probably by like 1987.
Okay.
And I started being the chapter and state development director in 1989. Before that, I did some legislative work, representation in meetings and coalition work on the Hill. But then she helped me. She made me the chapter and state development director. So I started rewriting all the materials. We started having state presidents trainings, which we over the years expanded to be activist training weekends, where we'd bring in groups of people from a state and have different tracks of trainings like for action, media, membership retention, leadership, event planning, all of that kind of thing. So I could see that it would work. And whether it did or not, but it was very exciting. And I still get Christmas cards from some of these people. Interns send me pictures of their grandchildren. It's really very rewarding to know that people did respond to that message about activism. They did feel like it was paying attention to the grassroots could not have been more important.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So that was, how long were you working with now?
Well, let's see. I started in the chapter development. We had, as you'll recall, we had an abortion rights march in 1989.
Right.
And with the growth and the energy and the money and so forth and so on that came in as a result of that, they started funding an entire chapter development staff again. And I think started out 2 of us, and then gradually we had a few more people. But that started in 1989, and I worked I worked as the chapter and state development director, and then doing some organizational development work, trying to write down more, to develop more training materials and write down more of what was in my head about some of the more complicated issues. Like I one time tried to write a chapter development report entitled "Dealing with Difficult People in Now."
Oh, that could be a long chapter.
Well, it was a wonderful project that never saw the light of day. But the truth really was that I had like 3 or 4 interns that wanted to work on it. And we did a lot of research. For example, we discovered some links from women who had been victims of violence,
Okay.
to their leadership styles being very controlling and manipulative.
Mhm.
And so it wasn't just let's run these people off, but instead try to figure out ways to work with them.
Yes.
So that was the kind of thing I did toward the end. In other words, I tried to put everything together. I tried to do one on nonviolent civil disobedience, and I discovered that really we ought to just have a team of lawyers write that because there were too many legal issues about that people were concerned about. So that didn't go very far, although I did leave quite a body of research and writing that we did about why that could easily be incredibly important on some of the issues that we were working on, like abortion and so forth. That civil disobedience was really would really be key going forward.
Did you travel to the states or state conferences?
Oh yes, yes. My family could give a much more colorful description of how I would be gone. Yeah, I traveled to 45 states.
Okay.
Some of them I had been in before, but some of them I had not. So it was just really, and I love that kind of travel. I stayed with people in their homes. I drove most of the time. I would fly and rent the cheapest possible rental car and drive to these places.
Mm-hmm.
I did state conferences, regional conferences, workshops, meeting with chapters, all of that kind of thing. I remember one time I was supposed to be at a meeting in Colorado, and there was an avalanche, and I couldn't get to the meeting because I couldn't get through the road. But it was really exciting to go out and actually see and meet the people where they were and what they were living with, because it's great to sit in Washington and talk about what people in Des Moines, Iowa should be doing with their time. And but you go to Des Moines, Iowa, and it's you get a different view. I think it made me much better at what I was doing, even though I came from that kind of background. It made me much better at writing things that people could hear, and not sounding like somebody inside the Beltway. And I think the idea of using our lists better, trying to the people who join through direct mail, pulling them in by getting those people, notifying them that someone was coming to their state and setting up meetings, and so you were getting some of the new people who had new ideas, new issues that they wanted to get involved in. So we were able to really diversify and grow some of the states, and that worked out very well. That's good.
So you were there 20 years.
I was there, my total time I left, I retired. I stopped working at the Action Center in 2008.
Okay.
And part of it was that I thought maybe what I wanted to do was to drill down a little bit more specifically to focus on maybe just membership work, because there were a lot of membership organizations in Washington that were looking to kind of grow their base of support.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the world was just full of these kinds of people after Obama was elected in 2008, who were way under the age of 60, who were perfectly willing to work for about a third of what I had been making, even at now salary. And so I realized that I needed to think through how I wanted to spend the rest of my life, what I wanted to do that used a lot of this, because I found the whole thing fascinating. I mean, the travel, the idea of going to people where they were, all of that kind of thing. So I made a list. I didn't do anything elaborate. I just started thinking through the things that I really enjoyed. Geography, which turned out to be about migration patterns and so forth, and history, and so I decided on trying to do much more with genealogy. The whole genealogy field was just changing by the minute, with a lot more of an ability to work on online and databases that you could access that way. And so this was more 2012, 2013. Okay. And so I started a small business, and developed a whole additional network of people that I could connect with. I have friends. Well, I actually work with people all over the world at this point. When I was talking about the genealogy, I'd like to kind of say a couple more things about that. One of the things that I had personally experienced growing up was that genealogy to an awful lot of people were these horrific books that listed births, marriages, and deaths. And there was really not, maybe little paragraphs about the people, but they could sedate hyperactive children. I mean, they were awful. And so I took a small page out of my past and decided that what the kinds of reports that I wanted to produce would have maps and pictures. And so I had to quickly learn a whole lot about copyright law, but I came up with a couple of card games that I made decks of cards that had all of your ancestors, and so you could play a version of quote unquote old maids with all of your relatives and so forth. And my clients have really found that to be very exciting to see. I know for example, this couple had moved out to Missouri in 1850. And I found a picture of what kind of transportation they probably took at the time, which was a covered wagon, and what a covered wagon looked like in 1850. And it just blew them away. I mean, they knew these people had made this trip, but to see how they did it made it very exciting to those people. So I think that has really helped me. I've done work for people who had Italian ancestors. Almost everybody came over here because they were either trying to escape a war, trying to get food and feed their families, or just wanting a job and wanting to work. As one person is quoted to have said, they told me that there were all these wonderful streets in the United States. I had no idea I was going to be building them.
There you go.
And so it's been a very it was a good decision. It was a good field for me to go in. But of course, I'm still involved in now, mostly at the state level. At this point, only at the state level. I've always been involved in Maryland now to a certain extent, but we, a group of people, and I started a concerted effort about 3 or 4 years ago to develop programs and approaches that used more social media, used more outreach to college-aged women, not looking for people who wanted these jobs for life, but that we could get information from them about how to organize our outreach. At the same time, we were giving them an opportunity to hone their skills, and that's worked out really well. And our work in Maryland is the work that I've been doing in Maryland is very it has been very good. But I do try to juggle so that there's some time left for my family, some time for me to get this work done with Maryland, and then of course I have clients. Invariably, I'm hopping along doing my stuff, and somebody wants to get into the DAR, and they have to find somebody, and so I've got to stop what I'm doing and actually do some work, billable hours.
Look at that, right? That's amazing. Now women don't quit working. That's my experience. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Would you mind commenting on what you saw, since you have such a long experience with the women's movement directly and the organization specifically? Would you talk a little bit about how it changed over the years? Yep.
Over the years, I think now has really done a very good job of adapting our priorities to understand that, you know, there are some times when certain issues are going to be front and center, and then other times we have to be flexible because something's going to happen, and we have to be able to move things like the direct mail program. We have to be able to adapt the membership messages and so forth and so on to accommodate. And I think that there have been administrations that have done a much better job of that, just because they either had better support in terms of the commercial vendors that we had and so forth and so on. I think in other ways, the organization has needed to, I guess the analogy that pops into my head is that anytime you have people who have their jobs through elected office, need to balance that with what looks good and what needs to be done. And what needs to be done is not always what's going to be, like Joe Biden is finding out today. I don't want to date the interview, but, you know, in other words, what needs to happen can't always be what is going to look the best to the grassroots, who may or may not understand why something needs to be done differently. And that's always been hard. That's always been hard, because obviously you want to get reelected, but you have to change sometimes. And I know that there have been times when I think the leadership has wanted, for example, to put a lot more money into developing diversity. And it just hasn't been there because the need at the local level is is something that'll bring in money so that they can buy equipment and stamps and supplies and send people to conferences and grow that way. And there's never been enough money. And I don't know, there are other groups that have solved this differently. I think there may have been ways for us to have figured out a way to take corporate money in a way that didn't tie us to the negatives of that they've been able to carve a little bit of a path where we could have gotten more money. But I think that the development of the development of having more resources has always confounded us. We've never figured that part of it out, and so we've never been a movement that could really have a really good financial footing.
So in looking at information that you provided, I was particularly taken with the fact that you were able to attend the Beijing conference.
I think the most exciting thing that I think I was able to do in terms of really seeing what was going on for women outside of the United States, because it, you know, you want, I wasn't always necessarily interested in having a chapter in Paris or something like that. I mean, that was really never, I didn't feel that that was at all feasible. But I was interested in how the movement was growing in other countries.
Okay.
And so when the Fourth World Conference on Women was scheduled for Beijing, China in 1995, I was really interested in going. And so I wrote a proposal for 2 workshops. One was just one that I was going to do on chapter development, because I wanted to see how some of these problems that people had in the United States, how universal they were,
Mhm.
and how other women had solved
Mhm.
some of these problems. The other one was one that we did jointly with, I'm pretty sure it was New York Now, that we did on consciousness raising. And both of them, I would say, were fabulous successes. The chapter development workshop was just an incredible experience. I mean, I started out, and of course, I didn't. The room was packed. I knew that there were people who didn't understand a word I was saying.
Right.
I spoke for about 3 or 4 minutes, and some women got up and said, "Wait a minute." And they reorganized the room so that they identified like 4 languages that people could hear English and speak this language. And so they organized the room.
Wow.
And you also have to understand that the place where the NGO forum was being held was out in the middle of nowhere, because what had happened was the Beijing government had bid on this conference thinking that it would help them get the Olympics. This was in the 90s.
Okay.
And when they didn't get the Olympics, this women's conference could not have been less important. It was just went by the wayside. None of the buildings were finished. There were stairs that didn't work. There was no plumbing. It was just amazing. So this room was, there were no windows. There were just openings in the wall where, a window would have been open out into the hallway. And so it was packed. There were people out in the hall, but people were very excited, and people had great ideas. I mean, I don't want to say it never occurred to me, but I learned a lot from the people who were trying to organize in places where the literacy rate was very low. Nobody could read.
Oh.
So you had posters about domestic violence that were just pictures of how somebody was experiencing domestic violence and could get help.
Wow.
And it was all just pictures, drawn pictures. There were some women from several countries in Africa were very frustrated because they could never get any visibility for some of their issues because AIDS was so horrible. And the papers, the media only wanted to cover everything from a perspective of, okay, you're working on women's rights. How does that affect AIDS? What are you doing to work on AIDS? And so it was really a tremendous eye opener. And I've tried to follow the women's movement in some of these countries, and they have made an awful lot of progress. It's really quite impressive to see how much they've really been able to do.
Mhm.
The consciousness raising was really probably in some ways even more interesting, because what was very clear was that in the patriarchal societies, a women's movement meant something entirely differently, was differently interpreted
Okay.
than in a country where it wasn't quite so patriarchal, and women did have an ability to actually work on things, that these things affected them directly. In the consciousness raising, we ran into trouble almost immediately, because none of the women from China and some of the, I don't think Japan would, but certainly the Chinese women, they were asked to identify themselves by their matriarchal line. These Chinese women could not do it.
No.
They could not make their brains work to say their mother, their mother's mother, their mother's mother's mother. And the idea, it would be offensive to their fathers, and their fathers were basically God. And so that was very eye-opening. That was, and so when I hear about some of these situations that have existed for many years in China, I can easily see how that's happening, and how Chinese women are just still really, really struggling. But it was a wonderful experience, and I learned a lot about what I was doing, about where grassroots organizing needed to go, not just in Duluth, Minnesota, but in Bangladesh.
Wow, that's amazing. What a wonderful experience. Really.
It was fabulous.
So what have we missed? Are there things that we haven't talked about that you would like to include in the interview?
I think that there are some things that I kind of wish maybe I had said a little bit better, but I don't know. That what's done is done. I got a lot of support in the Midland community, among my friends and so forth and so on, for the work that I was doing in Illinois. And I had a lot of people who helped me by agreeing to pick up my kids and take my daughter to gymnastics every Tuesdays and Thursday. I had people who would agree to, they were in ice skating classes, and they had to be at the ice skating rink at like 6 o'clock in the morning. And so there were people who said, oh, sure, I'll do that for a month. And so I think that sometimes when I can talk about all of these fabulous things that I have so enriched my life, I've got to thank some of the people who really made that possible. And that's very important, because I could not have done, especially the Illinois work, where I was gone so much.
Right. Do you remember how old your daughters were during that that Illinois period?
13 and 11. Yeah, 13 and 11. And I think they were very excited. I have one of my most prized possessions is a letter that my younger daughter wrote to the governor of Illinois, explaining, my mother has been coming to Illinois to work on the ERA. You really need to pass this.
Need my mother back. Right. That's
yes. Awesome. So I pulled that out of the letter writing pile to keep myself.
Good for you. That's amazing.
Yeah.
But it means, it just supports what you already said, which was you needed the support of people who would do real.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Help you in your
and I think that goes for a lot of what I did when I was just the chapter and state development director. It was a 55-hour week was common.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
dinner became a memory.
So all those women deserve our praise as well for
Absolutely.
the way in which they supported
Absolutely.
you, so you could support them. Yes, yes. Anything else we've left out, Barbara, before we close?
I cannot tell you enough how important I think this project is. And as I started reading about it, I I felt like an awful lot of our social movements could really benefit from a lot more of the insight of the people who are working on the ground, making the day-to-day things happen, and less pontificating from the people who think that they are doing all the work, think that they are in charge, that are sucking up all the oxygen.
Mhm.
And my illustration of needing people to be a sounding board for me developing some of my chapter development messages, and my friend that used to take me drag me over to Brookside Gardens and walk around for an hour and listen to me pontificating about all these uh, theories. That kind of support from your friends is also incredibly important, and that never gets, or rarely, I guess, gets public airing.
Yeah.
We can't do this by ourselves. We
No.
cannot do this by ourselves.